Are you cold-hearted? Are you mistrustful? Do you have a love of cybernetic enhancements? Well then, I have the Space Marine Legion for you. So welcome to part 3 on this series of the Space Marine Legions. You don't need to have watched the previous videos to understand this. However, if you are curious about the other legions we've discussed, there of course is a playlist for them all. And today, we're going to take a look at the Iron Warriors, their Primarch Perturabo, and what led them to fall to chaos. So, originally created as the 4th Legion, the earliest recruits to the Legion came from the warlike tribes on Terra, and as a Legion, they would prove themselves early on in the Unification Wars. If you wanted a Legion that were adaptable, had lower resistance to new enhancements, that were masters in siege warfare, then this Legion would be perfect for that task. As a Legion, they were extremely active, with the Emperor gaining control of the Sol system. Look, what they did had absolutely no flair. It was even completely unimaginative. Other Primarchs would laugh and joke about how unimaginative they were. But if you wanted a Legion that would do the hard work, show no let up in resolve, of course they were perfect. They would use heavy artillery and armoured spearheads. Inevitably, there would be heavy casualties. But what they did, it worked. Now, let's get on to the Primarch. So, of course, we know the story when the Primarchs were scattered in gestation pods. Perturabo landed on a planet called Olympia. So Olympia itself was a mountainous world, and being mountainous, there was huge amounts of stone, rocks, and this meant there were loads of fortresses built. The planet itself was ruled by city-states, and after a year on his own, Perturabo was discovered by one of these states, a state called Locos. And as a boy, he was taken to the Tyrant, where the Tyrant noticed that he had great intellect and skill, and he helped Locos create alliances with the other city-states. He sort of used Perturabo in a way as this boy wonder, and that boy wonder would bring a connection and that would help. But the Olympians themselves, they were a religious people, and Perturabo, as someone who believed in logic, in science and reason, was actually disgusted by this. And with that, he would also not show any affection to the Tyrant of Locos, who sort of adopted him in a way. But nevertheless, he would do his bidding and wage war where required against the other city-states, the ones that, weren't cooperating. And this is important when I mentioned the makeup of Olympia and its fortresses, because this helped Perturabo become an expert in siege warfare. He was merciless, cold-hearted, and at the same time, he was a great tactician. So eventually, when the Emperor would show up, Perturabo would then overthrow the Tyrant of Locos and take power for himself. And then Perturabo obviously would take control of his Legion. And to show what type of individual Perturabo was, he reviewed the records of his Legion, looked into how effective they were, their doctrines, their practices. And on top of this, he was also very brutal in punishment to his Legion. Some of his men were chosen literally at random and be made to be beaten to death by their fellow Legionnaires. If they didn't partake, they would then be beaten to death themselves. Nonetheless, Perturabo was an effective warlord. He could exploit weaknesses where others often could not see these. The Iron Warriors, on their journeys, created citadels throughout their conquests and would leave a small force behind each time, much to Perturabo's annoyance. Over time, Perturabo would have opposing thoughts to his brothers and the Emperor, and he would see things as strategically useless, whereas others would not. Whereas a lot of other legions loved their legion, Perturabo saw things different. As I said, he's cold-hearted. He's very scientific, wants fact. He saw his legion more as a resource, and wasting resources is not what Perturabo was about. And he would blame the Emperor and his so-called vanity projects and useless campaigns in losing some of these resources, having to leave some of these resources behind. And shortly after one of these campaigns, Perturabo would learn of a rebellion back in Olympia. and on his return he demanded the populace kill 1 in 10 as punishment. Of course they would refuse, so literally city by city became purged, and those that survived became enslaved. And any Iron Warrior who did not help also suffered. And with that, there was no going back now with the Emperor himself. But he did receive some praise from Horus for his actions for being swift, decisive. And upon the news of Istvan III, we all know what happened there. The Iron Warriors and the other loyalists were ordered to bring them to justice. But eventually at Istvan V, they, along with some of the other legions, which obviously of course we revealed in later videos, turned traitor. But there's one thing you need to remember about joining Chaos as such. It doesn't automatically make you besties with the other Chaos legions. You know, as Fulgrim did try and use Perturabo to ascend into demonhood. And if you want to hear about that, my Emperor's Children episode will teach you all about that. Anyway, Perturabo was a big deal for some of the conquest, especially for the traitors in Sol, and he oversaw the traitors taking Jupiter and Uranus. But Perturabo, being Perturabo, wasn't happy at being asked to fortify. Obviously, they wanted to fortify what they're taking. They expected the arrival of the Ultramarines in Guilliman, and Perturabo was still offish with Horus, and like his rest of his brothers, I never thought Ace ever trusted him completely. And even though Perturabo did play to Chaos and things like that, the thing is with Perturabo, if the writers had totally ignored Chaos for him, totally ignored the Emperor, I could honestly see him not bother with either side and just create his own rebellion and empire. But nevertheless, even though initially the Iron Warriors played a minor role in the Siege of Terra, they started to play a bigger part, especially after the siege was stalling. Anyway, we all know after loads of setbacks and requests, this would annoy Perturabo, and then he ordered the Iron Warriors just to leave, and they evacuated Terra back onto the battleship they called the Iron Blood. But as I mentioned before, the Legion was slowly falling to Chaos, and with that, Perturabo did eventually ascend into a Demon Prince undivided. The Iron Warriors inflicted a big defeat on the Imperial Fists, and sacrificing a lot of Gene Seed can help with the ascension, I suppose. Anyways, this is a quick look into the Iron Warriors, and with this I eventually will have a physical model in 40k of Perturabo at some point in time. Obviously Fulgrim is next in my opinion, but for Chaos Undivided, Perturabo would be a great model. We know Perturabo is involved with Vastor and building demon engines, so there can be some really cool things coming up with Perturabo as part of the storyline. So with all that in mind, the next video in this series will feature the 5th Legion, and this is the White Scars and Jagatai Khan, so make sure to subscribe to be notified when this releases, because this is honestly such a cool Legion. Thank you so much for watching, thanks to those all subscribes, and I'll see you next time.